The silence in our apartment wasn't an empty thing. It was a substance, thick with the unsaid and heavy with the scent of Julian. It smelled like his laundry detergent, a clean, sharp fragrance that clung to the sofa cushions. It smelled like the ghost of the coffee he'd made that morning, a dark, earthy aroma that settled in the kitchen. Most of all, it smelled of him, a warm, uniquely masculine scent that was some combination of his soap, his sweat, and something elemental I could never quite name. For 3 years, I had lived inside this silence, breathing him in, cataloging the details of his existence like a secret archivist. My life was a study in quiet observation. I worked from home, a freelance graphic designer tethered to a glowing screen in the corner of our living room. My world was bordered by the 4 walls of our 2-bedroom apartment, my social interactions largely filtered through emails and project management software. Julian was the outside world brought in. He was noise and movement, the thud of his work boots by the door, the clatter of weights from his bedroom, the low rumble of his voice on the phone with a client. He was a personal trainer, a man whose entire being was dedicated to the physical. He was solid, real, a vibrant splash of color in my grayscale existence. And I was, pathetically, secretly, in love with him. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic kind of love. It was a slow erosion. It was the way my breath would catch when he'd laugh, a full-throated sound that seemed to shake the very air. It was the way I'd watch the muscles in his forearms flex when he chopped vegetables for dinner. It was the quiet ache in my chest when he'd talk about a date he'd been on, his casual mentions of women slicing through me with a precision he could never comprehend. He was straight. It was the first, last, and most important fact of our dynamic. A hard, immutable wall I constantly bruised myself against. So I kept my distance, maintained the careful fiction of the easygoing, slightly aloof roommate. Leo, the guy who was always there but never in the way. Our routines were a dance of polite avoidance. We'd share a pot of coffee in the morning, our conversation limited to grunts and murmurs before the caffeine kicked in. We'd sometimes watch a movie at night, a safe 3 feet of sofa cushion between us, the space crackling with a tension only I could feel. I knew his schedule better than my own. Knew that on Tuesdays and Thursdays he came home late, smelling of chlorine from the gym's pool. Knew that on Sundays he meal prepped for the week, the scent of grilled chicken and roasted broccoli filling our small space. I knew the specific creak of the floorboard outside his bedroom door. I knew the sound of his breathing when he was asleep. This particular morning was like any other. I was at my desk, trying to coax a color palette into submission for a new corporate logo, the cursor blinking mockingly on the screen. The hiss of the shower started in the bathroom down the hall, a familiar sound that signaled the true start of my day. It was the sound of Julian washing away the sweat from his morning run. I could picture it all too clearly. The steam fogging the mirror, the water sluicing over his broad shoulders, down the hard planes of his back. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing the image away. It was a dangerous, well-worn path my mind liked to travel, and it never led anywhere good. I focused on the screen, on the hex codes and font pairings, trying to lose myself in the sterile world of design. The water shut off. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the usual quiet. It was a charged, expectant pause. I heard the bathroom door click open. I didn't look up. It was part of the rules I'd made for myself. Don't look. Don't watch. Don't let your gaze linger. It was a form of self-preservation. But then there was the sound of his bare feet on the hardwood floor, a soft, damp slapping sound that was getting closer. He was supposed to go to his room, which was in the opposite direction. My heart began a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Why was he coming this way? Leo? His voice was low, laced with an unfamiliar note of something. Annoyance? Embarrassment? I forced myself to keep my eyes glued to the screen, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. Yeah, I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I forgot my towel. My blood went cold, then hot. Every alarm in my body screamed at me not to turn around. But it would be weird not to. Weirder than staring. It would be a confession of sorts, an admission that seeing him was somehow dangerous. Slowly, deliberately, I swiveled in my chair. And the world stopped. He was standing in the archway between the living room and the hall, not 5 feet from my desk. He was completely, breathtakingly naked, save for the hand he had strategically, if somewhat ineffectively, cupped over himself. Water dripped from the ends of his dark hair, tracing paths down his neck, over the sharp line of his collarbone. Droplets clung to the light dusting of hair on his chest, glistening like tiny diamonds on the tanned skin of his torso. The overhead light caught the definition of his stomach, the sharp V that disappeared below his hand. He was a statue carved from living marble, all hard lines and smooth, damp skin. My mouth went dry. My brain, usually a frantic hive of overthinking, went utterly and completely blank. There were no words, no thoughts, just a white-hot, singular image searing itself onto the back of my eyelids. Julian, wet, naked, in my living room. He shifted his weight, and a small, awkward laugh escaped him. Dude. Earth to Leo. My eyes flickered up from his chest to his face. A faint blush colored his cheeks, but his eyes held a glint of something I couldn't decipher. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was amusement. It was a challenge. He saw me looking. Of course, he saw me. My gaze was a physical thing, a tangible force that was probably leaving scorch marks on his skin. I was devouring him with my eyes, and I couldn't stop. The archivist in me was taking frantic, detailed notes. The mole on his left shoulder, the faint scar just above his hip, the way the muscles in his thighs tensed as he stood there. A slow smirk played on his lips. It was the kind of smile he used when he was teasing me about my terrible taste in music or my inability to keep a plan alive. It was confident and a little bit cruel. Don't just stare, man. He said it lightly, a throwaway line meant to break the tension. But it landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The words hung in the air between us, shimmering with unspoken meaning. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, a statement of fact. You were staring. And in that moment, I felt utterly, terrifyingly exposed. He knew. Maybe he didn't know the depth of it, the years of quiet longing that backed up that single, hungry gaze, but he knew I was looking. He knew I was seeing him in a way a straight roommate probably shouldn't. My face burned. I finally managed to break eye contact, my gaze dropping to the worn patch on the knee of my jeans. Sorry. I mumbled, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Towel. Right. I pushed back from my desk, my movements stiff and jerky. I was acutely aware of him watching me as I walked past him, giving him a wide berth as if he were a bonfire I might accidentally fall into. The air around him was humid and smelled intensely of his body wash, a clean, sandalwood scent that made my head spin. I went into the linen closet, my hands fumbling as I grabbed the first fluffy towel I could find. It was one of the good ones, a thick, gray bath sheet. I turned, and he was still there, leaning against the doorframe now, his pose deceptively casual. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of quiet, unreadable assessment. I held the towel out to him, an offering, a peace treaty. My arm was a plank of wood. I kept my eyes fixed on a point on the wall just over his shoulder. His fingers brushed against mine as he took it from me. It was the briefest of touches, skin against skin, but a jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm. It was a spark in the silence, a sudden, sharp intake of breath in a room that had forgotten how to breathe. His skin was warm and damp. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. Thanks, he said, his voice a low murmur. He wrapped the towel around his waist, cinching it tight. The casual, easygoing Julian was back, the moment of vulnerability and tension seemingly erased. But I knew it wasn't. It was hanging there, in the charged air, in the way he was still looking at me. Save me from making a run for it. No problem, I said, my voice still a stranger in my own throat. He gave me one last look, a quick, searching glance, before turning and heading to his room, leaving a trail of damp footprints on the floor. I stood there in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I listened to his bedroom door click shut. The silence that flooded back into the apartment was different now. It was no longer just thick with the unsaid. It was vibrating. It was alive with a new and terrifying possibility. He had seen me. He had seen the way I looked at him. And he had smirked. I walked back to my desk and sank into my chair, my body feeling strangely heavy, my mind racing. The blinking cursor on my screen seemed to be pulsing in time with my frantic heartbeat. Don't just stare, man. The words echoed in my head, over and over. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. A simple, off-the-cuff remark from a guy who was comfortable enough with his own body and his own sexuality not to care. That was the logical explanation. That was the explanation that would allow me to continue living in this apartment, to continue existing in this fragile ecosystem we had built. But my body didn't believe it. My body remembered the jolt of his touch, the warmth of his skin. My mind kept replaying the look in his eyes, that brief, challenging glint that felt less like a dismissal and more like an invitation. I was a cartographer of Julian's expressions, and I had never seen that one before. It was a new and uncharted territory. For the rest of the day, I was useless. I stared at the logo on my screen, the colors blurring together. Every creak of the floorboards from Julian's room made me jump. I was waiting for something, though I didn't know what. For him to come out and laugh about it, to apologize for making things awkward, for the world to tilt back onto its axis. When he finally emerged hours later, he was dressed in jeans and a faded t-shirt, his hair still slightly damp. He moved with his usual easy grace, heading straight for the kitchen. He didn't look at me. He opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. The silence was back, but it was a brittle, fragile thing now. I felt like if I breathed too hard, it would shatter into a million pieces. I pretended to be absorbed in my work, clicking my mouse with a feigned sense of purpose. I could feel his presence like a magnetic pull, a weight in the room that shifted the center of gravity toward the kitchen. I was acutely aware of the small sounds he made, the unscrewing of the bottle cap, the soft gulp as he drank, the tap of his thumb on his phone screen. Finally, he spoke, his voice casual, normal. Too normal. Ordering pizza tonight. You want in? I turned, my well-practiced mask of nonchalance sliding into place. Yeah? Sure. Sounds good. The usual? He asked, his eyes still on his phone. Yeah. The usual pepperoni and mushroom. His favorite. It had become my favorite by default. He nodded, tapping at his phone. Cool. My treat. For the, towel rescue. He glanced up at me then, just for a second. His expression was neutral, but his eyes held that same flicker of something knowing. He was acknowledging it. He was naming the event, bringing it out into the open, but dressing it up as a joke. It was a masterful move, one that both diffused the tension and subtly reinforced it. He was telling me he remembered, and he was telling me we weren't going to talk about it. Not yet, anyway. The days that followed were a masterclass in hyper-awareness. That single, charged moment had recalibrated my entire sensory experience of our shared space. I was no longer just a passive observer. I was a detective, searching for clues, for evidence that what I thought I saw in his eyes was real. The apartment, once a sanctuary of quiet pining, was now a minefield of potential meaning. Every interaction was freighted with new weight. When he passed me in the narrow hallway, his arm would brush against mine. Before, it was an accident of proximity. Now, I wondered if he leaned into it, just slightly. I would feel the warmth of his skin through my shirt sleeve for minutes afterward, a phantom touch that sent my thoughts spiraling. Was that intentional? Am I imagining this? My mind became a courtroom where I was both prosecutor and defense, endlessly litigating the significance of a fleeting touch. He started doing it more. Or maybe I just started noticing more. He'd come to stand behind my chair while I worked, leaning over my shoulder to look at my screen. Looks cool, he'd murmur, his voice a low vibration so close to my ear that the hairs on my neck would stand up. I could smell the faint scent of his toothpaste, feel the heat radiating from his chest just inches from my back. I would freeze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, my breath caught in my throat. I tried to focus on the pixels, on the vectors and layers, but all I could think about was the solid, living presence of him behind me. He would linger for a moment too long, a pause that stretched the fabric of normalcy until it was thin and transparent. Then, he'd clap me on the shoulder, a firm, friendly gesture that was both a connection and a dismissal, and walk away. I'd be left there, my heart pounding, my concentration shot. I'd analyze the pressure of his hand on my shoulder. Was it just a roommate thing? Or was there something more in the way his fingers had briefly tightened before letting go? It was maddening. He was playing a game, and I didn't know the rules. Or worse, there was no game at all, and I was just projecting my own desperate hope onto his casual actions. One evening, we were on the sofa, watching some mindless action movie. It was our usual setup. him sprawled on one end, me on the other, the no-man's land of cushions between us. He shifted, stretching his long legs out, and his foot nudged mine. He didn't pull it back. He just left it there, the side of his sneaker resting against my socked foot. It was the smallest of connections, barely a touch, but it felt like a brand. I sat there, rigid, my entire being focused on that single point of contact. The movie played on. Explosions, car chases, witty one-liners, but I heard none of it. My entire universe had shrunk to the space where his shoe met my foot. My internal monologue was a frantic, screaming mess. Move your foot, you idiot. It's weird. He's going to think you're weird. But what if he wants it there? What if he did it on purpose? If I move it, will he think I'm rejecting him? Rejecting what? There's nothing to reject. It's just a foot. I risked a glance at him. His head was tilted back against the sofa, his eyes on the screen. His profile was cast in the flickering blue light of the television. His expression was relaxed, his jaw slack. He looked completely oblivious. Or he was the world's best actor. I couldn't decide which was more terrifying. I left my foot where it was. For the rest of the movie, we sat like that, connected by that one, tiny, ambiguous touch. It was the most intimate I had ever been with him. He was an instigator. I saw that now. The towel incident hadn't been an accident that he was now trying to smooth over. It had been an opening. He had knocked on a door he wasn't sure was unlocked, and now he was pushing it, gently, to see if it would swing open. He was testing my boundaries, seeing how far he could go before I pulled away. He'd offer a small touch, a lingering look, a comment laced with double meaning, and then he'd watch me. He was always watching me now. I'd catch him at it sometimes. I'd be at the kitchen counter, making a sandwich, and I'd feel the weight of his gaze on me. I'd turn, and he'd be in the armchair, phone in his lap, looking at me with that same unreadable expression from the hallway. He wouldn't smile or look away. He'd just hold my gaze for a beat too long, a silent conversation passing between us that I didn't have the vocabulary to understand. Then he'd blink, look down at his phone, and the moment would be gone. But it left an echo, a charge in the air that hummed long after. My own behavior began to change. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now mingled with a thrilling, terrifying hope. I started to test him back, in my own quiet, hesitant way. I stopped looking away when he caught me staring. I held his gaze, my heart hammering, trying to convey a fraction of the things I couldn't say. I stopped retreating when he got close. When he leaned over my shoulder, I would force myself to relax, to lean back into his presence, just a millimeter. It was a silent, delicate dance we were doing in the confines of our apartment. A push and a pull, a question and an answer, all communicated without a single word about what was actually happening. He was teaching me a new language, one spoken in proximity and eye contact and the space between bodies. One Saturday, a storm rolled in. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and the wind began to howl, rattling the windows in their frames. I've always hated storms. A deep, irrational childhood fear that never quite went away. Julian knew this. He'd seen me jump at a loud clap of thunder more than once, and he'd always tease me about it. As the first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the glass, he came into the living room. "Looks like a big one," he said, peering out the window. "Hope the power doesn't go out." As if on cue, the lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The apartment was plunged into a sudden, disorienting darkness. The hum of the refrigerator, the glow of my monitor, the drone of the TV, all of it vanished, replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive drumming of the rain. The silence in here was different. It was absolute. "Well, crap." Julian's voice came out of the blackness, startlingly close. My heart was pounding, a frantic rhythm against the backdrop of the storm. "I hate this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I know," he said, his voice softer now. "It's okay. I've got my phone. We can use the flashlight." A second later, a bright beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating his face. He was looking right at me, his expression concerned. He wasn't teasing. "We should find some candles," he said, his voice practical, grounding. "You know where they are?" "I think so. Kitchen, junk drawer." He kept the light on me as I got up and navigated my way to the kitchen, my movements clumsy in the unfamiliar dark. I felt like a stage actor caught in a spotlight. I fumbled through the drawer, my fingers closing around the waxy cylinders of a few emergency candles and a book of matches. We lit them and placed them around the living room. The small, flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, transforming our familiar apartment into a strange and intimate cavern. We sat on the floor, our backs against the sofa, the coffee table between us littered with flickering lights. The storm raged outside, a wild, chaotic symphony of wind and rain. But inside our little cave of light, it was quiet. "You really don't like storms, do you?" Julian asked, his voice low. I shook my head, staring into one of the flames. "Nope. My older brother used to lock me in a closet during them when we were kids. Said it was to keep me safe. I think he just thought it was funny. I hadn't meant to say that. It was a piece of my past I kept locked away, a small, stupid trauma that I was always embarrassed by." The words just slipped out in the strange, confessional atmosphere of the candlelit room. Julian was quiet for a long moment. I risked a look at him. He was watching me, his face half in shadow, half in golden light. The playful glint was gone from his eyes. In its place was a surprising depth, a softness I had never seen before. "That's a messed up thing to do to a kid," he said finally, his voice rough with something that sounded like anger. "It was a long time ago," I said, shrugging, trying to dismiss it. "Still," he insisted, "brothers are supposed to look out for you." We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the storm and the soft crackle of the candle wicks. The air between us felt different. The game was suspended. This was real. "You know," he said, his gaze distant now, fixed on the shadows dancing on the ceiling. "I've never really told anyone this, but the reason I got into personal training, it's because my dad was always so disappointed in me." I turned to look at him, surprised by his sudden vulnerability. Julian's dad was a successful lawyer, a big, intimidating man I'd met once or twice. I'd always assumed Julian was the golden child. He wanted me to be a lawyer, like him, go to a fancy university, join his firm. I tried. I did 1 year of pre-law, and I was miserable. I felt like I was suffocating. All he ever cared about was how things looked. My grades, my clothes, the girls I dated. It was all a performance. He let out a short, humorless laugh. So I dropped out and started working at a gym. He didn't talk to me for a year. He said I was throwing my life away to go play with dumbbells. He looked at me then, a wry, sad smile on his lips. Being strong, being physical, it was the one thing that was just mine. The one thing he couldn't control or judge. It felt honest. I just listened, my own childhood fears seeming small and insignificant in comparison. He was showing me a piece of himself he kept hidden behind the easy smile and the confident swagger. He was trusting me with it. In our shadowy, candlelit world, we weren't just roommates anymore. We were just two people, sharing old hurts. A particularly loud clap of thunder shook the building, and I flinched, a full-body jerk I couldn't control. "Hey," Julian's voice was soft, right beside me. I hadn't even realized he'd moved. He had shifted closer on the floor, the space between us gone. Our knees were touching. He reached out and put his hand on my arm, his grip firm and steadying. "It's just noise, man. You're safe." His touch was different this time. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a tease. It was comfort. It was a simple, human connection offered in the dark. I looked from his hand on my arm to his face. The candlelight flickered in his eyes, and in their depths, I saw something that made my breath catch. It was a reflection of my own yearning, a deep, quiet loneliness that mirrored my own. He didn't pull his hand away, and I didn't pull away from him. We just sat there, in the heart of the storm, connected by that single, grounding touch. The world outside could rage all it wanted. In that moment, for the first time in a long time, I actually felt safe. The power was out for 4 hours. We talked the whole time. We talked about things we'd never discussed in 3 years of living together. Our families, our first jobs, our worst fears. It felt like we were the only two people left in the world. When the lights finally flickered back on, flooding the room with harsh, artificial brightness, we both blinked, disoriented, like creatures disturbed from a dream. The spell was broken. Julian pulled his hand from my arm, and the loss of his warmth was an almost physical ache. The air was suddenly thick with awkwardness. The candlelit intimacy felt like a fantasy, and now the stark reality of our living room was back. "Well," he said, clearing his throat and pushing himself to his feet. Guess I should go check the circuit breaker. He didn't look at me as he left the room. I stayed on the floor, surrounded by the guttering candles, my arm still tingling where he had touched me. Something had shifted between us. Something fundamental. He had seen my vulnerability, and I had seen his. We had stepped off the path of our usual dynamic and walked for a little while in a new, uncharted territory. The question was, could we ever go back? And did I even want to? The delicate dance of the following week was more complex than ever. The casual touches continued, but now they were underpinned by the memory of that night. When his hand brushed mine, it wasn't just a spark of URSD anymore. It was a reminder of his confession, of the unexpected softness he had shown me. His lingering looks were no longer just a playful challenge. They felt deeper, more questioning. He was still watching me, but now it felt less like he was trying to get a reaction and more like he was trying to read my soul. The tension in the apartment was a living thing. It coiled in the silence. It hummed beneath our small talk about work and the weather. We were orbiting each other, two celestial bodies caught in a gravitational pull, spiraling closer and closer to an inevitable collision. I felt like I was holding my breath constantly, waiting for the tipping point. It came on a Thursday night. I had landed a big project, a complete rebranding for a tech startup, and I had been working nonstop for 2 days. I was exhausted, wired on caffeine, and my eyes were burning from staring at the screen. Julian had been out with friends and came home late. I heard his keys in the lock, the soft thud of his boots by the door. I didn't turn around, too engrossed in trying to align a particularly stubborn piece of typography. He came to stand behind me, his familiar presence a warm weight at my back. I braced myself for the usual routine, the lean in, the casual comment, the brief touch on the shoulder. But he didn't say anything. He just stood there, silent. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. I could hear him breathing. I could smell the faint scent of beer and the cold night air clinging to his jacket. My focus on the screen shattered. My fingers were frozen on the mouse. The back of my neck prickled with awareness. This was different. The game had changed again. "You work too hard, Leo," he finally said, his voice a low rumble right behind my head. "Deadline." I managed to croak out, my eyes still fixed on the screen. "It's almost 2 in the morning." "I know." Another long pause. I could feel him shift his weight. I felt, more than heard, him take a step closer. The heat from his body was intense. I swear I could feel it through my clothes. "Why do you do that?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. My stomach tightened. "Do what?" "Look at me like that." There it was. The tipping point. The direct question I had been dreading and longing for in equal measure. He wasn't talking about tonight. He was talking about everything. The towel incident. The stolen glances across the room. The held gazes that said more than words ever could. He was calling me out, laying all the cards on the table. My mind went completely blank. Every witty retort, every casual deflection I had ever rehearsed in my head, evaporated. I was left with nothing but the raw, terrifying truth. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stared at the glowing screen, my own reflection a pale, haunted ghost in the dark glass. "Leo," he prompted gently. "I am breaking. This is the moment I break. The carefully constructed walls of my self-preservation are crumbling, turning to dust under the weight of his quiet question. My heart is a frantic drum solo in the roaring silence of my own head. I can't breathe. I can't think. There is only him, standing behind me, his presence an inescapable force, demanding an answer I don't know how to give. I squeeze my eyes shut. I need to say something. Anything. A denial. A joke. But the words are stuck, a thick, syrupy lump in my throat. The silence stretches into an eternity. He's going to walk away. He's going to think I'm a freak. He's going to leave, and this fragile, beautiful, terrifying thing between us will be shattered. He moves. A rustle of fabric. I feel his hand on my shoulder. Not the casual clap from before. This is different. His fingers are gentle, his thumb stroking the tense muscle at the base of my neck. It's a gesture of such unexpected tenderness that it undoes me completely. A sound escapes my lips, a pathetic, choked little sob. "Hey." His voice is a low murmur, thick with concern. "It's okay." He steps around the chair, crouching down in front of me, so we're at eye level. His other hand comes to rest on my knee. He is so close. I can see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. His gaze is intense, unwavering, stripped of all artifice. There is no teasing, no challenge. Just a profound, searching sincerity. "Talk to me, Leo," he says, his voice quiet but firm. "Please." And the dam breaks. "I don't know how," I whispered, the words ragged, torn from some deep, hidden place inside me. My eyes burned with unshed tears. "Try," he urged, his thumb making slow, soothing circles on my shoulder. I take a shaky breath, the scent of him filling my lungs, that warm, clean, uniquely Julian scent. It grounds me. "I look at you." I begin, my voice barely audible. "Because I can't not look at you. It's like you're the only thing in color. And I've been living in black and white for a very long time." The confession hangs in the air between us, fragile and terrifying. I've said it. I've given voice to the secret I have carried for 3 years, a weight that has shaped the very contours of my life. I watch his face, bracing for the impact, for the flicker of disgust, the pity, the polite but firm rejection. But it doesn't come. His expression doesn't change. He just watches me, his eyes searching mine, as if he's trying to see the truth of my words written there. He doesn't pull his hands away. If anything, his grip on my shoulder and knee tightens, a silent reassurance. "For how long?" he asks, his voice impossibly soft. "Since the beginning," I admit, the shame and relief warring inside me. "Pretty much since the day you moved in." A muscle in his jaw tightens. He closes his eyes for a moment, and when he opens them again, there's a look of such profound, gut-wrenching regret that it steals my breath. 3 years, he says, his voice thick. "God, Leo, I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" I ask, confused. "You didn't do anything." "I'm an idiot," he says, shaking his head slowly. "A blind, stupid idiot. All this time, I don't know what I thought. I just knew there was something. This pull. Every time I walked into a room, I'd look for you. I told myself it was just a roommate thing. That I was just making sure you hadn't starved to death at your desk." A small, sad smile touches his lips. "But it wasn't that." My heart stops. Then it starts again, a wild, hopeful, frantic beat. What is he saying? What does he mean? "Julian," I start, but I don't know how to finish. He leans in closer, his forehead almost touching mine. His gaze is burning, intense. "I'm not blind, Leo. I see the way you look at me. And the truth is..." He hesitates, his own vulnerability now laid bare. "The truth is, I think I started looking back a long time ago. I just didn't know what it meant." The world narrows to the space between our faces. The air is electric, humming with everything that has been unsaid for so long. He is closing the final distance between us, slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I don't. I lean forward, that last impossible inch, and our lips meet. It's not a movie kiss. It's not explosive or desperate. It's quiet. It's soft. It's hesitant. It's a question and an answer all at once. His lips are warm and surprisingly gentle. There's the faint taste of beer, the ghost of salt. It's a kiss of discovery, of confirmation. It's the feeling of a lock finally clicking into place after years of fumbling with the wrong key. He makes a soft sound in the back of his throat, a sigh of relief, of surrender. His hand leaves my shoulder and comes up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. His other hand slides from my knee up my thigh, a warm, solid pressure that sends a tremor through my entire body. He deepens the kiss, and it changes. The initial hesitancy melts away, replaced by a deep, bone-weary longing. A hunger that matches my own. This is real. This is happening. Julian is kissing me. I bring my own hands up, my fingers gripping his forearms, holding on to him as if he's the only solid thing in a spinning universe. His muscles are hard and unyielding under my touch. It's all I can do not to break down completely, to let the years of pent-up yearning pour out of me in a torrent of tears. When we finally break apart, we're both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His thumb is stroking my neck, a steady, rhythmic gesture that is the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. "So," he murmurs, his breath warm against my lips. Not just staring then. A laugh, wet and shaky, bubbles up out of my chest. It's a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "No," I whisper back. "Not just staring. He pulls back just enough to look at me, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It's not the cocky smirk from the hallway. This smile is open and soft, and it transforms his entire face. It's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Good, he says simply, because I'm tired of pretending I don't notice. He kisses me again, and this time there is no hesitation. It is a kiss of certainty, of a new beginning. It is the sound of a very old, very heavy door creaking open at last. And all I can think is, home. This feels like coming home. The morning after was a study in silence. But it was a new kind of silence, one I didn't have a name for yet. I woke up first, a sliver of gray dawn filtering through the blinds. I was in my own bed, alone. For a disorienting moment, I thought I had dreamed it all. The storm, the candles, the confession, the kiss. It felt too fragile, too impossible to have been real. But then I shifted, and the phantom sensation of his lips on mine, the memory of the weight of his hand on my thigh, came flooding back. It was real. A nervous, fluttering energy filled my chest, a hummingbird trapped in my ribs. It was a terrifying mix of euphoria and dread. What now? What happens when the sun comes up on a world that has been irrevocably changed? I lay there for what felt like hours, listening for any sound from his room. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the city waking up outside my window. The fear began to creep in, cold and insidious. Maybe he regretted it. Maybe in the harsh light of day, he was realizing he'd made a huge mistake. He was straight. That fact, the one I had built my life around, was still there. Maybe last night was an anomaly, an experiment, a moment of candlelit confusion. The dread was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. I had finally gotten the one thing I wanted most in the world, and now I was going to lose it. The thought was unbearable. Finally, I heard the creak of his door, followed by the soft padding of his feet in the hall. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning sleep. I couldn't face him. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the look of pity, the awkward apology. I heard him move around the kitchen, the familiar sounds of his morning routine, the clink of a mug, the gurgle of the coffee maker, the soft click of a cabinet door. It was all so painfully normal, a stark contrast to the seismic shift that had occurred in my inner world. He was just making coffee, as if it were any other Friday. The smell of it, dark and rich, filled the apartment. It was a siren's song, pulling me from the relative safety of my bed. I couldn't hide forever. I had to face this. Taking a deep breath, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. My knees felt weak. I walked into the living room. He was at the counter, his back to me, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Our mugs. He was wearing a pair of worn gray sweatpants and nothing else. His back was a landscape of muscle and bone that I had spent years secretly memorizing. Now, the sight of it made my throat tighten for a whole new reason. He must have heard me, because he paused. For a second, his shoulders tensed. Oh God, here it comes. The regret. The "we need to talk" speech. He turned around slowly, a mug in each hand. His face was unreadable. He looked tired. His eyes met mine across the room, and the silence stretched, thin and taut like a wire. I felt my carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. My mouth was dry. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. He walked toward me, his movements deliberate. He didn't stop at the kitchen island. He didn't stop at the sofa. He walked right up to me, until he was standing just a foot away. He held out one of the mugs. "Coffee," he said, his voice low and a little rough. I took it numbly, my fingers brushing against his. The jolt was still there, a familiar shock to my system. Our eyes were still locked. I could see the uncertainty there, mirroring my own. He was just as scared as I was. "Thanks," I mumbled, my gaze dropping to the swirling black liquid in the mug. I couldn't bear the intensity of his gaze. "Leo," his voice was soft, but it held a command. Reluctantly, I lifted my head. "Last night," he started, and my stomach plummeted. "I woke up this morning, and for the first 10 seconds, I thought I'd dreamed it." He let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. And my first thought was disappointment, that it wasn't real. He took a step closer, closing the final space between us. He reached out with his free hand and gently took my chin, tilting my face up. His touch was feather-light. "It was real, wasn't it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes were searching mine, full of a raw, hopeful vulnerability. The stone of dread in my stomach dissolved, replaced by a warm, liquid rush of relief so potent it made me dizzy. A shaky smile touched my lips. Yeah, I whispered back. It was real. The tension in his shoulders visibly eased. He let out a long, slow breath, a puff of air that ruffled the hair on my forehead. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, the same open, honest smile from the night before. Good, he said, his thumb stroking my jaw. Just wanted to make sure. He leaned in and gave me a kiss. It was completely different from the night before. It was soft and chaste, a simple press of lips. It tasted of coffee and morning and a quiet, profound reassurance. It wasn't about passion or longing. It was about connection. It was a promise. It said, I'm still here. This is still real. He pulled back, his eyes crinkling at the corners. So, now that we've established that, he gestured with his mug toward the living room. I was thinking, maybe we could skip the whole awkward morning after thing? Because honestly, I'm not very good at it. A real laugh escaped me this time, bright and unburdened. Yeah, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I think I'd like that. The fear hadn't vanished entirely. It was still there, a faint tremor beneath the surface. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of navigating this new, uncharted territory. My internal monologue, my constant companion of anxiety and self-doubt, was still whispering questions. Is this just a phase for him? Am I just an experiment? What happens when he meets a girl he actually likes? For years, his straightness had been a shield, protecting me from the possibility of both heartbreak and happiness. Now that shield was gone, and I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I never had before. But sitting on the sofa with him that morning, our shoulders pressed together, sipping our coffee in a comfortable silence, a new feeling began to take root alongside the fear, hope. It was a fragile, tender green shoot pushing its way through the cracked earth of my cynicism. Julian wasn't a flighty person. He was steady. He was honest. He had looked at me with a vulnerability that matched my own. This wasn't something to be afraid of. It was something to be protected. We didn't talk about labels. We didn't define what we were. We didn't need to. Not yet. For now, it was enough to just be. We spent the weekend in a quiet bubble of our own making. We watched movies, but this time there were no cushions between us. I'd rest my head on his shoulder, and he'd drape his arm around me, his fingers tracing idle patterns on my arm. We ordered pizza, and when he came back from the door, he leaned down and kissed me before he even put the box down. Each small act of intimacy was both thrilling and perfectly natural, like a limb that had been asleep for years was finally waking up. I was learning a new version of Julian. The playful instigator was still there, in the teasing remarks and the cocky smirks. But there was a new layer of tenderness, of attentiveness. He'd watch me with a soft-eyed focus that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He was a tactile person, I realized. He was always touching me now, a hand on the small of my back as I passed, his fingers lacing with mine as we sat on the sofa, his knee pressed against mine under the table. He was anchoring me, anchoring us, with these small, constant connections. On Sunday evening, we were in the kitchen, making dinner together. It was a simple, domestic scene, one that had played out 100 times before. But now, everything was different. The space felt smaller, more charged. I was chopping onions while he stirred a pot of sauce on the stove. You know, he said, his back to me, I've been thinking. That sounds dangerous. I teased, my voice light. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. I was thinking about my dad. I paused my chopping, surprised. He hadn't mentioned his father since the night of the storm. He used to say that the most important thing in life was to have a plan. Julian continued, his voice thoughtful. A 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. Know where you're going. Don't leave things to chance. He turned to face me, leaning back against the stove. I've spent my whole life either trying to live up to his plans or running away from them. I never stopped to make my own. He looked at me, his gaze direct and serious. I don't have a plan, Leo. I have no idea where this is going. It's new territory for me. It's kind of terrifying. The familiar knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I put the knife down, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. But, he said, pushing off the stove and walking toward me. He stopped in front of me, boxing me in against the counter. He placed his hands on the counter on either side of me, his body a warm, solid wall in front of mine. It's the first time in a long time that I haven't felt like I'm performing. With you, it feels like that night in the storm. It feels honest. He searched my face, his expression earnest. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't have a plan, but I want to figure one out. With you, it was a declaration, a conscious choice. He was laying his uncertainty, his fear, and his hope out for me to see. He was inviting me in, not just to his bed or his life, but to his future. Tears pricked my eyes. I had spent so much of my life feeling like an observer, a ghost in my own story. And here was this incredible, solid, real person telling me he wanted to write the next chapter with me. I don't have a plan either, I whispered, my voice thick. My only plan was to not get my heart broken by my straight roommate. And I failed spectacularly at that. A grin spread across his face. Yeah? How's that working out for you? Terribly, I said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. It's the best failure of my life. He wiped the tear away with his thumb, his touch impossibly gentle. Good, he murmured, and then he kissed me, a deep, lingering kiss that tasted of tomato sauce and salt, and the breathtaking promise of a future I had never dared to imagine. We ate dinner on the floor of the living room, our plates balanced on the coffee table. The food was probably mediocre, the sauce a little burnt, the pasta a little overcooked, but it was the best meal I had ever eaten. We talked and laughed, our legs tangled together. The apartment, which had for so long felt like a space of confinement and secret longing, now felt like a world of its own. A sanctuary. Our sanctuary. Later, as we were cleaning up, he wrapped his arms around me from behind while I was rinsing the dishes, resting his chin on my shoulder. I leaned back into his embrace, my eyes fluttering shut. His solid warmth enveloped me. He was real. This was real. Hey, Leo, he murmured into my ear. Yeah. Remember that first morning? When I forgot my towel? A smile played on my lips. Vaguely, when I said, "Don't just stare, man." He paused, and I felt him press a soft kiss to the side of my neck. I think maybe I was hoping you wouldn't stop. I turned in his arms to face him, my hands coming to rest on his chest. I could feel his heartbeat, a steady, strong rhythm beneath my palm. It was the sound of my new reality. I looked into his eyes, the eyes I had spent years studying from afar, and for the first time, I saw my own reflection there. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was a participant. I was seen. I was home. Don't worry, I said, my voice low and full of a certainty that felt brand new. I don't think I ever could.